Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thompson Hine's webinar, Caught in the U.S. China Trade War Crossfire, a Tariff Survival Guide. I'm David Schwartz, and I'm chair of Thompson Hine's International Trade Group. I'm joined today by my colleagues Michelle Lee, who's an associate in the International Trade Group, and Scott Diamond, who serves as the International Trade Group's Senior Legislative and Regulatory Policy Advisor. Today, we'll explore how your company can survive the U.S.-China trade war and its tariffs. We'll provide you an overview of the U.S.-China trade conflict, its origins, and its impacts so far. We'll discuss the Section 301 process and explain how you can navigate its product exclusion request procedures. For those companies exporting product to China, we'll detail how you can obtain relief from China's retaliatory tariffs through China's product exclusion request process. And if you are unable to obtain a Section 301 product exclusion, we'll describe what options are available to adjust your supply chain to lessen the impact of these tariffs. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items to mention. Today's program is being recorded and will be available on our website. While questions will be addressed at the end of the program, you are welcome to submit questions throughout the program itself using the question box on the side panel of your screen. We will do our best to address all questions during the presentation. If we're unable to get to all of them during the program, we'll follow up with you after the program offline. The PowerPoint slides that we'll be using in today's program are available for download under the Handout tab on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, in that Handout tab, you'll find biographies of today's presenters. Finally, as a caveat, I must advise you that we're not providing legal advice during this program. The program is purely informational. We are, of course, available to assist you after the program. Let's start with a quick overview of the origins and the current status of the U.S.-China trade conflict. The origins of this conflict began 40 years ago in the 1970s, when China began to transition from its non-market economy. The process led to tremendous economic growth, especially in manufacturing, and helped China accede to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in 2001. In large part due to the benefits from its WTO membership, China was able to accelerate its growth, and today is the world's largest manufacturing economy and the world's largest exporter of goods. As part of China's rise, it has become a very attractive country for foreign investment and has allowed China to impose policies on foreign companies to help China grow even more. China has forced foreign companies to partner with Chinese companies in their production facilities, require the transfer of foreign technology to the Chinese partners, and China has failed to support the intellectual property rights of foreign companies in China, leading at times to outright intellectual property theft. While U.S. companies have complained and the U.S. government has raised these issues with China, these problems have persisted over time. Enter the self-proclaimed tariff man, Donald Trump. Before he became president, he made known his strongly held views on trade, dating back to the 1980s. He measures the success of a country by its bilateral trading good balance with others. Since the United States' largest trade deficit by far is with China, it was close to $376 billion in 2017, President Trump has made clear from the start of his administration that he would address this problem and any others with China through tariffs, to correct the trade imbalance and to provide leverage in any trade negotiations. This next slide provides a status update on the conflict, listing the various tariff actions President Trump has taken, either directly against China or with China in mind, to increase U.S. manufacturing, correct the U.S. trade in goods deficit, and to force China to change its practices. While the Section 232 tariff on steel and aluminum imports applies to imports from countries around the world, it has had a disproportionate impact on China because China is the world's largest steel and aluminum producer. The Section 301 tariffs, which we'll be discussing in depth in a moment, has led to negotiations with China on a wide range of issues. Recently, the Trump administration completed its Section 232 investigation and report on the national security impact of imports of autos and auto parts. But it has not made that report public yet or taken action. Again, while this action would affect imports from around the world, it still would have a disproportionate impact on China because of China's emphasis on automated vehicles, electric vehicles, their related technologies, all of which are part of China's Made in China 2025 high-tech initiative. In the Trump administration's view, all of these actions have provided the United States more leverage in its negotiations with China. Those negotiations were sidetracked 6 weeks ago, amid claims of bad faith, but are expected to pick up again when President Trump and President Xi meet this Saturday on the sidelines of the Group of 20 summit in Osaka, Japan. It's expected that certain concessions will be made to get the talks moving again. This morning, in fact, it was reported that the two countries have tentatively agreed to hold off on additional tariffs. In terms of the United States, this means that the Trump administration would delay tariff activities for List 4 of the Section 301 process. List 4 covers approximately $300 billion worth of imports from China. It remains to be seen whether this tariff truce will hold. Let's plunge into the Section 301 process now. It started in August 2017 and resulted in a March 2018 report from the U.S. Trade Representative that found China to be taking action under its laws, policies, and practices that required the transfer of U.S. technology and international intellectual property to enterprises in China that may be negatively affecting U.S. economic interests. The U.S. Trade Representative determined these actions to be unreasonable, discriminatory, harmful, and burdensome to U.S. companies, and approved of tariffs in retaliation to force China to make changes to these policies. The first tariffs were implemented on July 6, 2018. There were 25% tariffs placed on $34 billion worth of imports from China, known as List 1. That list had products that focused primarily on automobiles, industrial machinery, electronic equipment, and medical devices, covering around 818 different harmonized tariff schedule subheadings. A product exclusion request process for those products soon followed. Unlike the Section 232 exclusion request process, the Section 301 process is not an ongoing process. For List 1, it ended on October 9th, at which time over 10,000 exclusion requests have been submitted. To date, there have been 5 batches of exclusions granted by the U.S. Trade Representative, covering approximately 2,400 exclusion requests and granting relief for products under 40 full harmonized tariff schedule subheadings and relief for special product descriptions under another 179 harmonized tariff schedule subheadings. On August 23rd, 2018, 25% tariffs were assessed on an additional $16 billion in imports from China, known as List 2, which again covered mostly high-tech and industrial products. Its product exclusion request process ended December 18th, 2018, with over 3,100 exclusion requests submitted. To date, no exclusions have been granted. On September 24th, 2018, 10% tariffs were assessed on another $200 billion worth of imported Chinese products. Those products are known as List 3 or Tranche 3, and they cover an extremely broad range of products in over 5,700 harmonized tariff schedule subheadings. Those tariffs were increased to 25% in May. With that increase to 25%, the U.S. Trade Representative announced last week that the exclusion request process for List 3 would start in a few days on June 30th. As for List 4, which would cover an additional $300 billion worth of imported Chinese products, covering over 3,800 harmonized tariff schedule subheadings, the process began in May with public hearings. The process began in May and public hearings started last week and were completed earlier this week on determining which products should be covered or excluded. While it appears that List 4 activities will be delayed as a result of Saturday's meetings between President Trump and President Xi, we will believe it when we hear it. Scott Diamond will now discuss the product inclusion request process for the List 3 products.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to walk through the next couple slides that go into a bit more detail on the product exclusion process. I want to start with some recent news that the U.S. Trade Representative's Office has created a special portal to help users navigate the Section 301 tariff process. At the conclusion of our presentation, there'll be some website and links that will be shown that will help you get there. But it will be helpful to the users because you will be allowed to plug in your 8-digit HTS subheading and run the search with that, and it will tell you whether that your HTS that you're searching for is actually subject to the Section 301 process and any tariffs, and if indeed it is, it will tell you which portion, whether it be List 1, List 2, or upcoming List 3, whether it's which one of those lists it's caught under, and if the process for commenting is still open, it will provide the user, the searcher, with a direct link on how you can pull up information on that and how you can submit comments if you so desire. The exclusion process overall has evolved since List 1 was first implemented back in September. For List 1 and 2, exclusion requests had to be submitted via a specific U.S. Trade Representative's docket that was posted on the U.S. government's electronic regulatory portal at www.regulations.gov. And with each list having its own separate docket, it would require at times multiple searches in those dockets in order to determine who had commented on a particular submission, who had objected, and who perhaps had supported, and what the overall status was. Now, with the implementation of the exclusion request process for List 3, as David has indicated, that starts on June 30th and will close on September 30th. Parties for that will access a newly created portal for filing those exclusion requests. It is not yet active. It's one of those links that we'll show you at the conclusion of our presentation. But USTR is promising that it is a much more user-friendly process. I will believe that when it goes live because the user guide itself is over 100 pages long. But I am hopeful that it will, at the very least, will once you plug in an HTS number, it will pull up everything within that one search result page, and users won't have to go hunting and searching around. You'll be confident that you'll have everything for that HTS right there. Now, as for the exclusion request process itself and completing the form and the submission, during past rounds of the request, USTR has required a clear identification of the affected 10-digit HTS subheading, along with a detailed description of the product covered under that subheading. Parties were then asked to identify whether the product or a comparable product is available from sources in the United States or in third countries. USTR also required the submission of the value and quantity of the Chinese origin product that was being purchased by the submitter in each of the past 3 years, and that could be submitted as business confidential information. Now, what we know for the exclusion request process involving list 3 products, all of the above, all the data points I just mentioned will again be necessary. However, USTR has added new requirements that submitters must report value and quantity data on any U.S. domestic and any third country purchases of the product in question in each of the past 3 years as well. The submitter will also be required to report their gross revenues for 2018 and the first quarter of 2019. And this request will also have to include, and the submitter will have to distinguish on imports from China sold as final products in the United States versus imports from China used in the further production of final products. So the list 3 exclusion request process will be a little bit more detailed. This next slide, I just wanted to covers the 3 main exclusion criteria that USTR has set forth. Now, as David has noted, the opportunity to submit an exclusion request for list 1 and 2 has now closed. And for those 2 lists, we're just monitoring for our clients' exclusions that are being granted in an effort to help them determine whether any full HTS subheading exclusion grants or any partial product description exclusion grants are helpful to them. And we're already being called on to assist in preparing exclusion requests for 3. So these are the 3 criteria that USTR has been looking at and considering and reviewing all of the data that I described in the previous slide. If a requester is claiming that a product is not available from sources outside of China, an explanation of any attempts to source the product from the United States or third countries must be provided. You cannot simply just check the box, no, that it's not available from anywhere else. You have to provide some type of analysis and explain why China is the only source available to your company. And in that process, we found here, Thompson Hine, that HTS import data contained in the U.S. International Trade Commission's data web portal can often be helpful in such a review, because you plug in an 8 or 10-digit HTS number into that data web portal, and it will show you for the last 3, 4, however many years you wish to go back, the imports both in quantity and value under that HTS number from all of the countries around the world. And so most often we found that that can help explain, at the very least, the quantity argument here. Because quite often when you plug some of these HTS numbers in, you will see that China is by far the largest importer of these products. And in some instances, we've actually been able to highlight in exclusion requests that if you combined all of the other countries together, their import quantity does not even match that is coming in from China. Thus, if China is removed from the U.S. market, those imports are removed, then demand would far exceed what remains available. Now, for the second bullet point, whether increased duties would cause severe economic harm, in explaining this, submitting confidential business proprietary information will be necessary, obviously. And as I previously said, USTR does allow for the filing of a confidential version of these requests, so long as a public version is also provided. On this point, data that is most helpful is showing significant purchases of Chinese products where other sources are limited or unavailable, and then a discussion of lost revenues, shutdown of production lines, lost investment in facilities that you may be involved in within China, and shutdown of production lines, and perhaps even the potential for a reduction in employment. And thus, obviously, why they acknowledge the need to submit a lot of this information as business confidential. And finally, the requesters are also asked to indicate whether they feel the product is strategically important to the Made in China 2025 program, which will likely be a more prominent argument that I think we're going to see for list 3, since it covers many everyday commercial items. So thus, I think a lot of submitters are going to be arguing that since Made in China 2025 focuses on advancing China's manufacturing and technology capabilities in industries such as information technology, robotics, aerospace equipment, green energy, medicine and medical devices, that a lot of the everyday products that are now captured under list 3 simply would not advance China's intentions here under the Made in China 2025 program. Now, other helpful arguments that David, Michelle, and I have used in assisting clients have been to argue U.S. public health and safety concerns. And we've seen some of those be granted. If you can argue that if the product from China is excluded from the U.S. market, or whether it is going to significantly drive up costs if you continue to have to import from China, and you make that public health and safety argument, that's a fairly strong argument. We'd also argue that, I'll get to it in the next slide, but in a rebuttal period, you can also coordinate with some of your suppliers or perhaps some of your customers and arrange for them to also submit comments and support. We found that to be helpful. Now, the one negative argument is that if you are arguing you're sourcing from China due to cost, and that's really your only argument, that China offers a lower cost of production, that's not a strong argument, and most often that's going to result in a denial of your exclusion request, is what we're seeing. Now, next is the actual process here. This slide indicates, as I've already noted, that for list 3, the only one that will open on June 30th, it will close in 90 days, so as of September 30th, 2019. And if list 4 is actually implemented, as David has noted, as of yesterday, we've read that there's currently a truce and that President Trump will not implement tariffs for list 4 at this moment. But we do know from Ambassador Lighthizer that USTR has already committed that if list 4 does go active, that they would offer an exclusion request process for that list. So as you'll see here, once a submission is deemed complete and actually posted on the portal, other interested parties will have the opportunity to respond, either in support or opposition of the request, and they will have 14 days once it is posted to file those comments. And before it goes back to the Section 301 committee for a full review and analysis, you as the submitter would then have 7 days to review the opposition or support and submit any final reply you might feel is warranted. Now, as for offering, we've had many clients wonder how long this process takes. And we've just, offering a time period for this process has really become fruitless. The comment period for list 1 has been closed since October, and yet the majority of requests submitted remain pending. So there's just, once it goes back to USTR for a full and final review, there is no statutory or regulatory requirement that they wrap it up within any certain stated time period. Now, if the request is granted, your exclusion is retroactive to the date that the tariffs were first implemented. So, for example, an exclusion granted for list 1 will be retroactive to July 6, 2018, and it would be valid for 1 year from the date the granted exclusion is published in the Federal Register. Now, my final point here is, given the ongoing trade dispute, parties have started to ask us whether granted exclusions will be automatically renewed if the tariffs remain in place. In recent congressional testimony last week, Ambassador Lighthizer stated that they will not be automatically renewed. He would not go any further than that. However, he did acknowledge that the fact of the overwhelming submission of the exclusion requests, that his office is hiring new employees and contractors to address and process a request. However, David, Michelle, and I don't think the process is going to get any better since the products on list 3 is 4 times larger than list 1 and 2 combined. So the submissions there are going to be quite significant. Now, at this point, I'd like to introduce our colleague, Michelle Leash, and we're going to switch from the U.S. side of product exclusion and tariffs and switch over to the China side. And she's going to walk you through how China has implemented retaliatory tariffs and their own exclusion request process.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. On May 13, 2019, the Customs Tariff Commission of China's State Council, CTCSC, announced a product exclusion process related to China's Section 301 countermeasures. This long-awaited Chinese product exclusion process offers a valuable duty avoidance opportunity. U.S. products subject to China's first 3 tranches of tariffs are eligible for exclusion as long as there is no prior revocation or suspension in place. In other words, only products that fall within the list of products subject to China's retaliatory tariffs in effect would be eligible for exclusion. The products subject to China's Section 232 countermeasures were not included in the current exclusion process. Generally, the CTCSC will accept and review exclusion requests in 2 stages. Stage 1, the CTCSC will start to accept exclusion requests for Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 products as of June 3, 2019. And the current window for Stage 1 will close on July 5, 2019. In Stage 2, the CTCSC will accept exclusion requests for Tranche 3 products from September 2, 2019 to October 18, 2019. However, the CTCSC has not imposed any deadline for making its decisions on such requests, and stated only that it will publish approved exclusion lists according to exclusion procedures. Product exclusion requests can be submitted by interested persons, which include companies in China that are impacted by these tariffs, such as importers, manufacturers, users, and trade associations or chambers representing such companies. Subject to further clarification by the CTCSC, companies in China often include not only wholly owned Chinese companies, but also WFOEs, wholly foreign-owned enterprises, or joint ventures registered in China by foreign companies. Companies are encouraged by the CTCSC to have their trade association or chambers to file exclusion requests on their behalf. Now, the exclusion request for Stage 1 can be filed at the website of the Tariff Policy Research Center of the Chinese Ministry of Finance. This link will be introduced to you at the conclusion of this webinar the presentation, and it is online and live now. The Chinese product exclusion process in many ways replicates the U.S. exclusion process. Interested parties must provide facts and data to support their requests. The CTSC will make its decisions on a case-by-case basis. However, the CTSC notes the following 3 prerequisite criteria for one's requests. The first criteria is difficulties in seeking alternative sources of the subject products. This is very similar to the U.S. product exclusion process. Now, the second criteria, severe economic harm to the requester as a result of the imposition of additional duties on the subject products. I have to note that this criteria is slightly different from the similar criteria in the U.S. process. In the U.S. exclusion process, parties can show severe economic harm to a U.S. interest, not necessarily limited to the requesting party. Now, in the China's process, the second point, however, is only limited to economic harm shown to the requesting party. It is always easier to show a severe economic harm by the industry. In fact, perhaps due to that perspective, the CTCSC encourages the trade associations or chambers to file such requests. If a company has submitted information to a trade association or chamber, and the trade association or chamber has filed a collective exclusion request for a particular product, the company may not file a request for the same product. Just a note there. And the third criteria, which is significantly negative structural impacts on relevant industries, including impacts on industry development, technological progress, employment, environmental protection, and so on, and any other severe social consequences. This criteria does not have a corresponding one in the U.S. process. This would be a perfect place to make arguments of public health, safety, public interest that Scott just mentioned. Last point that I want to make is about the effect of a granted request. Granted requests will be effective for 1 year as of the implementation date of the associated exclusion decisions. No additional duties would be imposed on these products during this 1 year period. Chinese importers may, within 6 months of the publication date of the relevant exclusion list, apply to China Customs for the refund of additional duties imposed by this Chinese government if certain refund conditions are met. Now, no further guidance was provided on the definition or scope of refund conditions. The CTCSC's announcement also did not specify whether the exclusion would be retroactive to the effective date of the tariffs. However, according to the regulations of the People's Republic of China on import and export duties, where an importer discovers that it pays any import taxes beyond that required by law, it may apply to China Customs for a refund within 1 year. Where China has terminated or suspended imposition of additional duties on some products before the publication of exclusions, no duties imposed would be refunded. The CTCSC's announcement does provide that under the following two situations, the refund conditions are deemed to be met. First, the products on an exclusion list were excluded on the basis of relevant Chinese HTS codes. And second, the products on an exclusion list are part of the products covered by relevant Chinese HTS codes, and China Customs is administratively capable of granting the refund, i.e., when supplementary Chinese HTS codes are provided for the products on the exclusion list.
Thank you, Michelle. I'd like to add that our firm, in partnership with Chinese law firms, can assist U.S. companies that want to take advantage of the product exclusion request process in China. Let's now return to the United States and talk about what happens if you've applied for a product exclusion request and have been denied, or if you're unable for whatever reason to apply for a product exclusion request. What options do you have still to lessen the impact of the Section 301 tariffs? You have options, and you have options that you can utilize through your own supply chain. And we're going to look at a couple of categories where you can tweak what you're doing currently to take advantage of the process. First, let's talk about how you classify under the harmonized tariff schedule your product. We offer a couple of options. I'll call the first one the easy option, and the second one, I'll call it the more involved option. The easy option involves your company analyzing your HTS product classifications for all your products and determining whether they're accurate. You'd be surprised at how often we've done this kind of analysis for our clients and have found that they were using the wrong classification. And the right one, it turns out, wasn't subject to a Section 301 tariff. That is something that you can do internally. That's something that outside counsel like Thompson Hine can help you with. But we encourage you to do that analysis before you succumb to paying the Section 301 tariffs. The more involved option regarding your product classification involves tariff engineering. That's the term we use. It involves modifying your manufacturing and processing of a product in a country, in China or elsewhere, to change the classification of the product so that it isn't subject to a Section 301 tariff. Again, that involves a deeper analysis to determine what meaningful changes you can make to a product that will change the HTS number to one that's not currently subject to Section 301 tariff, and that will lead to a change in the product classification. Let's look at the options that you have regarding the country of origin for your product that may be currently subject to a Section 301 tariff. Again, I offer an easy option and a more involved option. The easy option doesn't apply to everybody. I'll tell you that from the start. It involves a company that has multiple production facilities worldwide for a particular product, and that company is able to shift the production from China to a third country. If they're able to do that and still save money by avoiding the tariff, then of course it's a no-brainer, you should do it. The more involved option involves shifting a significant portion of production of a product either at the front end or at the back end of the process to a third country to change the product's country of origin through the concept of substantial transformation. For the uninitiated, substantial transformation occurs when an item undergoes a fundamental change in its form, appearance, nature, or character, which adds to its value an amount or percentage that is significant in comparison to the value which the item had when exported from the country in which it was first made or grown. This can lead to a change in the product's country of origin. I wish I could tell you there was a magic formula to follow when it comes to substantial transformation, but there isn't one. The determination has to be made on a case-by-case, product-by-product basis and can depend on a very specific variety of factors dependent on the product itself. Many companies who take this route obtain a Customs and Border Protection ruling to obtain certainty. We often will provide legal analysis to our clients in advance of any ruling request to CBP to determine whether the proposed production change will likely succeed in changing the country of origin for the product.
On this next slide, in it are the links to the various websites that we've mentioned throughout the webinar. The first website that I would recommend on the U.S. side is the China investigation record. That's at the USTR website. That's the very first link at the top of this slide. That provides, if you're new to this process or need to look at some historical records or data, that's the website you want to go to. It has the actual federal registration notice and presidential proclamation that began this whole process. It has the detailed findings of the USTR that determined that there was actionable conduct that could be implemented under the tariffs. And then it breaks down into each tariff, list 1, list 2, and list 3. It gives you links to hearings regarding those lists, and it actually gives you links, particularly for list 1 and 2, to the USTR dockets so that you can do further research in order to determine whether a particular HTS has been successful in receiving an exclusion grant. The second website is the one that just went live that I mentioned earlier, the Tariff Navigation Tool, where you can plug in the 8-digit HTS number and conduct various searches in order to determine whether that HTS is covered under the Section 301, and if it is, what type of action, if any, can be taken at that point. The third one is the USTR exclusion process. That one gives you also links to list 1, list 2, and list 3 that were posted in the Federal Register so that you can search that way in order to determine whether your HTS subheading is covered, and gives you links to various forms that were necessary in order to file for list 1 and 2. That would be historical data at this point. The new one that is yet to go live is the USTR Exclusion Request Portal. And that is where list 3 exclusion requests will be filed. And that's where you will follow and track and monitor your exclusion requests submitted through that portal. And for the 5th one, that is the one that Michelle referenced. That would be the Chinese exclusion request portal through their Ministry of Finance.
To keep updated on all that's occurring with the Trump administration and their trade policy actions and with the Section 301 process, we encourage you to visit our blog, our website, trumpandtrade.com. Not only can you visit it and we update it on a regular basis throughout the week, you can also subscribe. You'll see on this screen that you can enter your email address and we can push out updates to you when they are published. With the time that we have remaining in the session, we are opening up the panel to answer any questions that you may have. I see that we've received a few during the session itself. The first question deals with the success rate of a Section 301 product exclusion request. What are a company's chances of getting an exclusion? Is it worth the time and trouble?
And David is looking at me, so I'll take that question. We only have data from list 1 to go by for that right now. As David indicated, list 2, you did have the exclusion request process, but to date, absolutely no exclusions from that list have been granted. I don't think that's particularly a sign that none are going to be granted. I just believe that it's a sign that they are so overwhelmed still in looking at the 10,000 exclusion requests from list 1 that they quite honestly probably have not. They've only begun to initially look at list 2 to determine whether they're substantially complete. But for list 1, going from the data there, honestly, the majority, there have been 5 rounds of exclusion requests that have been granted. Yet the majority remain incomplete, and quite a few have been denied. They've been denied most often. There have been some batches that have been denied because they are like a high technology product or a chemical where the USTR has determined that it would advance the Made in China 2025 program. But the vast majority of denials that we've seen so far have indicated they've been denied because the submitter has not indicated that they or the U.S. industry would suffer severe economic harm. So reversing that, where we've seen success for our clients and for others that other HTS numbers that we monitor, have been where you have been able to make the argument that China, number one, China is really the only source for this product. And if you remove it from the U.S. market, there will not be sufficient supply to meet demand. Or if you remove it from the U.S. market, prices will, without a doubt, increase in such a significant manner that it will impact the ultimate end user, being the U.S. consumer. Those have been the best 2 arguments that we have seen. And on those 2 points, I think they are typically successful. They significantly increase the chance that you'll have a successful result.
Of course, we tell our clients that if you don't apply, your chances are 0.
Absolutely.
So we encourage you all, if you have a good reason, even if you don't have a good reason, we'll help you come up with one. We encourage you to seek a product exclusion from these tariffs. Another question that we received from the audience is, how close is the U.S. Trade Representative to determining whether or not approved exclusion requests will automatically be renewed once they expire?
Well, as I indicated, when Ambassador Lighthizer was testifying before Congress last week, he indicated point blank that they have no plan in automatically renewing them at this time. Given that that was a question that came from a member of Congress, however, I think there will eventually, if negotiations again fail and the tariffs remain in place beyond the 1 year mark of the tariff exclusion, if the tariffs remain in place and go beyond an exclusion period of 1 year, I think there will be significant pressure from Congress to automatically renew them and or for a very streamlined process in which the submitter can obtain a renewal by indicating that circumstances have not changed in any way, shape, or form.
I agree with Scott. There is tremendous pressure from Congress to ensure that for as long as the tariffs are in place, that these product exclusions will be in place. And I think that is a concession based on what we've been hearing that the U.S. Trade Representative will make. As long as the tariffs are in place, they'll ensure that in some manner the product exclusions will remain in place, or there will be a streamlined process, as Scott said, for a relatively easy renewal of the exclusion. The next question we have has to do with the Chinese product exclusion request process, and it's a more general question. We are quite familiar here in the United States with the process using regulations.gov and the new portal that's going to go live in a few days. And we're aware that all these requests are made public, or at least there are public versions and business confidential versions, and parties have the opportunity to object, and then there's an opportunity to rebut. The question we have here is the process in China as transparent as the process in the United States? When you make a filing of a product exclusion request, what happens?
Thank you, David. So I would take this question. As I indicated, conceptually, the Chinese product exclusion process replicates the U.S. exclusion process. Procedurally, the CSC does respect parties' interests, especially in their business proprietary information. So the CSC's announcement provides that parties could submit their request and identify all the business confidential information as not being disclosed. And now the CSC's announcement does not provide any reply and rebuttal procedures for the Chinese product exclusions process.
Thank you. I don't think I can add anything to that. No. I'll defer to Michelle. The next question we have is short but sweet. Can my company use a foreign trade zone here in the United States to avoid the Section 301 tariff? I'll field that one. Generally, no. If you plan to enter a product into U.S. Customs territory, you'll have to pay the Section 301 tariff. It's just like having to pay a trade remedy duty, an anti-dumping, countervailing duty, or safeguard duty, that once the product enters U.S. Customs territory, you have to pay that punitive duty. Now, if you re-export the product from the foreign trade zone and it never enters U.S. Customs territory, then the Section 301 tariff is never assessed and you don't pay for it. Do we have another question? Rather lengthy one. Can you provide us tips for how businesses should track the efforts, expense, and processes that have been required to navigate and implement tariff changes so that business impact can be assessed and reported, and perhaps booked advantageously in terms of operating performance? Excellent question.
Yeah, maybe Dave and I can both chime in here as well as Michelle if she has any thoughts. I do know that for in commenting, several of our clients in commenting on list 4 and preliminary arguing that even before that list is finalized, certain HTS numbers should come off in their opinion. We have discussed with those clients and they have been able to pull up their data that has indicated what list 1, 2, and 3, how those tariffs have already begun to impact their operations. So I think that's probably your most significant argument going forward, is just accounting wise breaking that out, the tariffs that you have actually, the duties you have paid to customs that have come in. And then I think also it would be employment, whether employment in your actual day-to-day operations. Have you had to idle a production line? Have you had to shut down a facility in the United States or actually even in China that has impacted your bottom line and impacted your production and the supplies that you have been able to submit into the U.S. market? Do you have anything further, Dave?
I think that's good advice to follow for now. I think we're still learning from our clients about what processes they intend to follow, but I think you've identified some of the key issues.
I would also add that one thing we didn't touch on in these exclusion request process, if your industry has a trade association, you can contact your trade association and actually inquire as to whether they would industry-wide be willing to submit an exclusion request process, and then see if they are tracking import numbers as well, quantity and value of imports, whether they are dropping due to the tariffs, and some industry-wide figures that hopefully your trade association would be tracking and be able to provide to you to make a strong argument.
That's an excellent point. I'm glad you raised that. Do we have any other questions from the audience? If there aren't any other questions, I think we'll wrap up the program with a few minutes to spare. I'd like to thank you for joining us on the Thompson Hine webinar, Caught in the U.S. China Trade War Crossfire, a Tariff Survival Guide. As mentioned earlier, the slides that we used today, as well as a recording of the webinar, is available on the Thompson Hine website. And we welcome any questions that may occur to you after we sign off. We're happy to follow up as quickly as we can to address those questions. Thank you again, and have a great day.